think fiber holds this sort of like DNA that's very much related to our gender, to the woman's history. And it has also that sense of community, that sense of sitting in a sewing circle and just, talking and releasing. And you go to school and the academy teaches you that art's not therapy. But then I think the only medium that holds this sense of connectedness, it's fiber art. So I started to work with different yarns, more contemporary, more stretchy, with nylon, with acrylics, things that you could buy at the store that came industrial residues of commercial brands that were cutting and yarns that were sustainable and whatnot. But then I started to step back and think, okay, if this is where's the origin of these? Let me go back to discover the principle of these new, more contemporary fabric. And I started to explore more the traditional weaving and understanding the principle of the handmade yarn, from the process of carding the wool, collecting the wool, cleaning it, and then turning it into yarn, and then creating the fiber from there. So this is a table spinning wheel. So once I card the wool, this is where I'm gonna make the yarn. This process, usually it's a floor spinning wheel, like the one from, what is it, Snow White? But this one I bought in Mexico, and it's very comfortable because it's a table one, and it has the same principle. It's just that this is jute, so it stretches over time. So I'm creating like a double knot for it too, with a fabric that's not that stretchy, for it to work. So this is a more traditional method of creating yarn when you're using natural fibers. Of course, now most of the fabrics, most of the yarns that you get are done industrial. So this is a more traditional method. I'm always trying to do like these little tests. I have this bunch of like little tests here with like, this is t-shirt yarn that during the pandemic, during the peak of the pandemic, you couldn't have access to the art supply stores. So where do you go? You go into your closet. That's where you go. We clean our closet. I got like 20 shirts from my husband, and it's like, okay, let's make yarn with it. So I started to create all these bunch of like spools made out of t-shirt yarn until, everything opened up, and then I went to a store and I bought that. But I felt that materiality in the process of being trapped in the house and in the studio, that not having access to go to the store to buy supplies. So this was the time to look for those recyclable materials, because everything wasn't shut down. And everyone was starting to clean their closets, right? So this is t-shirt yarn, which it's an opposite of all these natural processes that we've been sharing. The feel to it, it's a lot more cold, I would say, than working with the wool, that you feel it's precious, because it's like every bead of it came from an animal. So here you cut, in a spiral way. until you get to the neck. The shirts are very good, are the ones that they don't have a seam, just like this one, because when you're creating the yarn, they don't break, they don't snap. This is a traditional way of learning the loom. When you're a kid, if it's not the floor loom, because you might have one in the family, then you start learning this way. And then you cut it here, and you have your weaving. So right now I'm starting to do the weaving part. Actually, this is the part of trying to get the colors that I want, the textures that I want. On this one I started to work with alpaca wool on this thickness, because this is a smaller version of what I want to bring here and make larger. So I want this sort of like bold, puffed up texture. This is raw wool, and I wanted to try that here. Of course, for that you have to have the right material for it. So this is you know, kind of like finding that texture. You have to find the material for it. Once I moved from the loom on the wall, I started to experiment with frames, some frames that I had available here at the studio. You start to recycle that. So these are stretcher bars, regular stretcher bars, that I started to create the warp, and then started to create the different graphs and knots. And it was important for me to create, sort of like organize these scales. So there's like macrame in it. There's sort of like these flow, this tension that started to happen. I started to look for different recyclable yarns, some that were more transparent, thinner, thicker, stretchy. And I found this company that works exactly with companies that use the residue of the different, the seasonal clothing campaign, and then what it's cut, what it's trimmed from, let's say a t-shirt, they turn it into yarns. I started using a different kind of material during the pandemic. It was precisely because I didn't have access to the loom or yarn. So I started to look into creating recyclable yarn and creating a loom on the wall, just because I had access to that. And I started working with the red, and then the red started to become very symbolic as well. This idea of the graphics that we were looking at from the first months of the pandemic. And then I started to pay attention to sort of like how this is very much a graph. And I started to play with the heights and the lows and creating pigs instead of like the back and forth with what they were saying. So the same process of weaving took me to a very conceptual work then that was called Texture of Grieving. And then it just developed from there. It developed from that process of like understanding and feeling the yarn and sort of like thinking ahead of time where I wanted to go. So I became very meditative as well. And then I started to think also about the symbolism that's held in weaving, sort of like how society also works that way, how we need each other, how we need to support to create something bigger than ourselves. So the whole meaning of it became more important as a technique. So the specificity of the weaving brings me to abstract works. It's like words that balance, where's the values, how you create the tension, where's the punch, and to work with the visual texture that's happening within the construction and the composition of the frame in itself.